Hi, everyone. Welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Wade. I'm here with my trusty co host, Alex. And we do have a special guest this week, John Manganiello, who's a senior reporter for ThinkAdvisor magazine, where he covers topics related to retirement income planning as well as technology more broadly in the financial planning space. And John, we're excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm an avid listener to the podcast. I think you guys are up to episode 180 or 181 at this point. So very impressive run. I actually do my own podcast for ThinkAdvisor called Ask the Retirement Expert. And we're, I think, 35 episodes in, and it's been a big lift. So I'm impressed by the pace that you guys are able to maintain. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, thank you. I think you've written a couple articles based on some of our episodes. So thank you so much for that as well. And it's great talking to you in person. And I know we've met in person, actually in real life, IRL,
Yep.
at the American College Conference in March. So
Yep.
great to see you.
Yeah, for sure. What a great event that was.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you for the art, and especially Wade. It's after I'm the focus of the episodes. That's when the articles get written. So you got to pick it up.
Right.
You got to pick it up, buddy.
Alex-centric.
But John, really appreciate all the stuff you've done. This is a little bit of a point of departure from us in terms of, hey, let's have a journalist on. But we thought it would be a great angle for our listeners, simply because we have many consumers and we have quite a number of financial advisors that also listen in. And like we said, your focus on retirement income is, I feel, spot on many times. And I think you share an insight from the way you analyze the landscape that we don't have as advisors and consumers do not have, just because they're not in the thick of it. And we thought it'd be cool to bring out.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I'm able to say that I enjoy my job. So I've been writing about the financial services space since about 2012. I studied journalism in college, had an original interest in writing about politics and policy, whether maybe move to Washington, but I kind of quickly burned out of that topic because it's a little confrontational. It's hard to get people to share information. And my experience in the financial services realm has been really the opposite. It's great to be able to connect with so many practitioners, so many people, researchers like yourselves, advisors, and consistently throughout my career, I've just been lucky to be able to speak with people who are very generous with their expertise, generous with sort of the work that they're doing, and that's been a real through line. But I'd also say, to your point, Alex, I do get a pretty unique view of the retirement plan industry, the wealth management industry, because I'm speaking with advisors from all different firms all the time. I'm speaking with product manufacturers, asset managers, researchers, organizations like the American College of Financial Services, the Investments and Wealth Institute. So it's really given me a high level view of what's a very dynamic and very important industry here in the United States. I think you guys know, when we go to these conferences, you see a lot of familiar faces. It feels like a tight knit group of people, but it's a really outsized impact that this group and this industry has on our culture, I would say, on our economy. So I think it's an area where, as a journalist, I've really been able to find a nice niche, and I feel like I'm able to contribute, useful information both to financial advisors themselves, but also to the public. So it's very, like I said, I'm lucky. I enjoy the work for sure.
No, that's great. And based on that balance that you play here, what do you see? Because one of the before this conversation started, we just did a little level set, and I think a great angle is ultimately you're seeing what's on the forefront of technology that advisors are using to help facilitate advice to clients. There's technology in terms of scaling your practice, or using AI for note taking and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's of less interest to me right now, simply because this is about just financial advice and being able to provide it more effectively, etc. What are you seeing right now that with the phrase "the future's here," it's just not evenly distributed, kind of thing. And so consumers, they don't see the distribution that advisors are seeing, in terms of technology. What are some of the things that are exciting you right now from
Yeah.
a eventual trickle down approach to consumers?
Yeah, I would say just firms are putting tools in the hands of their advisors to provide more holistic and more effective financial planning. It's the world has moved on from stock picking and helping clients set up portfolios. That's really table stakes right now. What firms are doing all across the board is putting tools in the hand of their advisors that allow them to do things like if tax efficient retirement income planning, tax loss harvesting, looking for opportunities of where to deploy the next best dollar. It's really elevating the work of financial advisors, and I find that to be very exciting. Like I said, I've been at this for some time now, and that's been a steady evolution. We for a long time I've heard advisors and their firms talk about providing holistic advice and going beyond the portfolio. It really feels to me like we're at a time when that's becoming the reality. It's been the vision for a long time, and I think we're pretty much getting there. A lot of the planning technology has become a lot more sophisticated and a lot more capable, and I think that's a great thing. It couldn't be happening at a better time because we're seeing this silver tsunami. The baby boomers are entering retirement. It's we hear this concept of peak 65. There's never been more need and more demand for effective financial planning as it pertains to creating income streams, helping people convert the success they've had in accumulating wealth within 401k plans, helping them to sort of turn the page and begin to spend that down in an effective manner. I mean, I'm speaking to two of the top experts in terms of income planning and income style awareness that you guys advocate for. I think you guys fit right into what I'm seeing in terms of what's most important and most exciting for the industry. And the flip side of that, Alex, you mentioned advisors and their practices. I think advisors are thrilled to see this happening too, because they're able to deepen client relationships. They're able to use these planning tools to really get to know their clients better, to really understand their goals and vision for the future, and really how to set up a lifestyle for them that will be both sustainable, and enjoyable in retirement. Something that's comes up so consistently as whether I speak to members of the public or financial advisors, is just the tremendous amount of fear that's out there about retirement, right? Because even for people who have accumulated millions of dollars in a 401k, or perhaps they're fortunate enough to have, to be business owners and have substantial wealth, even those folks have a lot of fear about retirement. And I think the industry is at a point right now where it's grappling with that fact, and they're really trying to put planning front and center. I think it's a good thing, but it's not easy to do.
No,
sure.
no, and to your point, I just want to ask you almost as a side note. You said it at the beginning, and I have a follow up to that. But holistic is becoming this sort of catchphrase that it reminds me when in my younger days, where you always try to go to the clubs where no one knows about, but then once everyone knows about, you move on to some other club, kind of thing, because it's been had, that kind of vibe. And holistic seems to be that kind of word. Before it was fiduciary, that.
Yep.
What does that mean? And now holistic is something you can't get away from. I'm even like, did you spell it with a W, just an H? How would you define holistic, and why is that important in a non-buzzy kind of way? Just like straight up, you're talking to somebody at a dinner table, and you use the word holistic, and they say, wait, what the heck is that?
Yeah, point well taken, Alex. And my response to that, and it's filtered through the lens of a reporter whose beat is technically retirement planning. It's helping people create a lifestyle in retirement that they are confident will last until the end of their life. It's, to me, it's a narrower view of what holistic means. It's helping people create an actual paycheck and a lifestyle after they leave the workforce that meets their needs. And I think that involves addressing people's expenses, their own personal lifestyle in retirement. So making sure they have their needs, wants, and wishes addressed. But then it also includes their goals for things like passing down a legacy to their children, or, if they don't happen to have children, or maybe they're more charitably minded, it includes legacy planning from a giving perspective. So it's really, it's all of these things that create a sense of purpose for people after they leave the workforce. Because I think you guys have seen this. I've seen it. People here in the United States of America, for better or worse, we really identify with our work, and people feel an interest in being productive and, having a career. And that's wonderful. But what happens when we get to that third or fourth part of our life where we are departing the workforce, and we need to create some sort of sustainable lifestyle, both from a financial perspective, but also from literally a behavioral and enjoyment perspective. So to me, holistic advice has to touch all those boxes, and it's really about helping people actually retire, helping them enjoy the fruits of their labor. Something that I find really troubling, honestly, is that even people who have done it right, who have sufficient assets, a lot of those folks aren't enjoying retirement because they're, number one, they're disconnected from community. They don't have, pastimes, perhaps. They don't have a sense of purpose during retirement. And it's just such a shame, because we work so hard to get there. We make sacrifices to ensure that, we're responsible and are investing and setting aside for the future. Yet we get there, and it doesn't fulfill people the way that, we might want it to. So to me, holistic advice has to address all of those things. And the behavioral side of it is just as important as the dollars and cents. So.
Yeah. And that's why you're seeing the improvements in technology, because really creating a holistic plan is complicated. Yep. Considering the behavioral, what is the preferences, what is the person looking for, but then all the financial planning questions, like when do they claim Social Security, how do they have a tax efficient drawdown strategy, yep. How are they going to cover long-term care, Medicare decisions. There's so much that goes into it, yep. That it becomes a very complicated problem. But really, could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with the evolution of technology, of tools that are helping the advisor solve for these 100 different variables that you need to find the right combination, yeah, to get the best possible solution?
Yeah, my first response to that would be that there's definitely not one single tool or platform that can help advisors do everything. I think right now advisors continue to, like, for example, I went to the Orion conference fairly recently, and their whole mission right now that they're working on is taking all of these tools that exist in the ecosystem that can address all the different piecemeal things that we've just discussed, and mm-hmm. how can we actually create a unified platform that has all of this stuff, within one dashboard where you can click through and go from Social Security claiming here through to, considering debt here, and, wants and needs over on this side. I think the industry is still working on creating a holistic platform that can address all of these things. Personally, I don't know that will ever be possible to get it all in one, simple package, because, like you're describing, Wade, it is a complicated plethora, of tools and solutions that advisors can use. I think the solution there is less on creating one single package that can allow advisors to do all of this stuff, and the more effective approach is to educate advisors on how to use these tools and how to bring things together in a way that they're managing, and in a way that they can deliver, complete advice. Maybe that's a better word than holistic, Alex. I was trying to think of what would be better, but I think it's still a work in progress, Wade. But I do think the industry is putting a lot of resources towards that. I recently reported a story with Raymond James. Their technology budget for 2025 is $975 million. And next year, wow, that will likely go above $1 billion. And they're spending that money on these things that we're discussing, trying to get these tools put together in a coherent way that allows their advisors to serve clients more effectively and serve more clients at the same time. Because obviously, firms, they see technology as an opportunity to build scale. You referenced that earlier, Alex, and that, I think that's, it's an important thing. Obviously, it's important for their growth and their desire to be successful businesses. But on the flip side, there's a lot of Americans right now that are simply locked out of the financial advice space because they don't have sufficient assets to attract the to attract the interest of advisors who have the skill sets to do everything that we're talking about. So,
But
you know,
but if you
yeah,
do better, we do better. If you have a
yeah.
million or more, is that the tagline?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the firm. It depends on the firm. And to be totally clear, I have a ton of respect for firms that set high minimums because they're providing a service that's needed in the marketplace. What I find to be really exciting is when I meet new advisors who are doing fee based financial planning. Maybe they're starting their own registered investment advisor. Maybe they're joining a platform like a Dynasty Financial Partners, or there's 4 or 5 platforms out there that are empowering a new way of delivering advice that's really all about financial planning and is either flat fee or maybe asset based. And a lot of those advisors are folks that are more, in my generation, the millennial generation,
I
or,
got you.
younger Gen X folks who are just really interested in planning. And I think it's exciting to see the work that they're doing. A lot of them they're working with they basically set no minimum because they're working on a fee, and
No, it's a
they're
very
delivering
it's a
some
very
interesting
interesting
stuff.
it's a very interesting thing. With here, I'll share with you what we've done here, and I'll give you the structure. Obviously, Wade and I are managing principals of McLean Asset Management.
Yep.
Wade started a blog many years back when he was in Japan called Retirement Researcher.
Yep.
When Wade joined us in the fold, we obviously took Retirement Researcher and turned that into an RIA, a registered investment advisor firm, but it's a non-asset RIA. We're not managing assets. It's
Yep.
more for educational purposes. We created an RIA off of that because it's the balance between what's advice, what's education, and so we erred on the side of being just as safe as we can, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so effectively what happened is that, with the content that's created and the like, we've had a huge following, and we turned Retirement Researcher into a masterclass of retirement income planning, sort of
Yep.
Netflix, where it's a subscription-based service where you can join on a monthly basis. We have workshops, we have this and that, and it's very specific, and so it's most common denominator advice, right? But it's high quality. But
Yep.
within that, and it's the way that Wade and I and everyone else can scale in that manner, as opposed to one-on-one meetings. But within
Yep.
that, we realized we can offer one-off planning within that. We never did that before. McLean is, it's a traditional AUM-based model. But because of Retirement Researcher, what happens is someone takes the RISA, we're able to, based on their style, okay, Retirement Researcher may be the best option for you, or directly to McLean. But that's given us the ability to provide great service to everyone. But
Yep.
also, if someone just wants to learn, here you go. Who better than Wade to lead that? And then within that construct, we can offer one-time financial planning if they want to do that as well. And if they want more done for you kind of services, McLean is there. And
Yep.
so having those different kind of branches that people can sort of choose their own path has been actually quite interesting for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It must be.
And you couldn't do that with technology. And we did that. Those are, effectively, McLean is McLean, and that's the traditional tech stack that you would find in an RIA firm. But with Retirement Researcher, and this is what led to the RISA, they're really, WordPress plugins
Yep.
that helps us create like a membership site. It helped us create the first iteration of the RISA. It's helped us create the first iteration of a funded ratio that we use, which
Yep.
because of the success of that funded ratio, we're actually going to embed that into the RISA. We're in the process of doing that right now. And
Yep.
so it really is amazing how technology can be this medium to really scale out planning in a very interesting level. Our budget for that on a yearly basis is about $975,
Yeah.
but we make do. We make
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. No, I appreciate. It's been really interesting for me as a reporter to follow along with the journey that you guys have been on. I remember, Wade, it was several years ago when you decided to step back from academia and really double down on a lot of this stuff, and that felt not to make too much of it, but that felt like a big moment, right? I'm sure, obviously for you personally, but going back to what I was talking about this pivot towards a focus on income planning and delivering effective retirement advice, that was a pretty exciting moment, for someone with your background to say, okay, I'm stepping back from academia in order to focus on solving this problem. This is the time to do it. So it's been quite interesting to follow along with you guys. I'm a big fan of the RESA framework. I love anytime you can get a 4-quadrant, sort of visualized approach to helping people. Yeah, helping people think through. It's a great framework. So it's been interesting to see you guys develop that.
No, thank you. And this goes back to a question I want to ask Wade to start it off. And John, I'm happy to get you. I'm curious what your take is. A lot of times we get asked questions, specifically tax planning, Roth conversions, like niche down retirement income questions.
Yeah.
And usually a consumer is like, hey, how can I figure this out? And they start off on Excel, and then they realize, oh, I need pivot tables. I'm out. I'm not going to do anymore. That kind of stuff. And they ask Wade, hey, are there any consumer versions of the software? And our answer is usually, no, there aren't, because it's highly specialized. And if I'm a software company, the market just simply isn't there for this highly specialized niched question to offer to consumers, because they wouldn't be able to support it. They literally, because the type of complicated questions that arise from it just doesn't, there's no business case for it. And so with advisors, they can, because advisors obviously are certified, they've taken courses, they're experts in this topic. And so the questions are reduced by orders of magnitude. And so we throw our hands up in the air and say, listen, I think advisors are the only ones that have access to this kind of software because of the business case for the software provider.
Yeah, the customer service needs to go direct to consumer. It would make it too expensive for the software.
And what would be your thoughts on that? Because you said a point that I think is also in vogue right now, which is, what's the next best step? What's the next best step? And that usually involves some sort of niche software to determine that next best step.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that sort of conundrum, if you will, that consumers face of not having access to the best and brightest solutions?
Yeah, I don't, Wade, if you wanted to add anything before I respond to that.
Well, and it's, I guess ultimately the role of the advisor in all of these processes, there's always going to be people who can do it yourself. And I think the listenership of the podcast will reflect many do-it-yourself type individuals. But even if we did get to the stage where the technology could solve the problem, it's still going to be a matter of implementation. And there's ultimately always going to be a role for an advisor for a large portion of the population to actually ensure things do get implemented, that the AI is not hallucinating, but that should improve more and more over time. But yeah, there's going to be a role for that human element. And then it's easier for the software providers to work directly with the advisor because they can scale a license for the software they're using with many clients, so they can afford to pay a higher price for the software, whereas an individual household that needs more attention, customer service, that's where it's not scalable, I think, and I don't know how that could ever really improve.
Yeah, my response to that would be, if I think you're spot on, Alex. It's a real conundrum, and if I could think through a way to make that work, I'd probably give it a crack. But it's not something that is easy to do. To me, I always just come back to, likening the role of the financial advisor. It's similar to the role of an attorney, the role of a doctor. And in certain cases, there are just these, challenging issues that really professionals are the only ones who are qualified to do it. So I think it's a real shame that a lot of people don't get access to the type of advice or solutions that would allow them to really improve their financial situation and maximize their enjoyment of retirement. Where it heads in the future, I do think the role of artificial intelligence could help, but that's obviously comes along with its own potential downsides. But yeah, I think that's a problem that the industry is really has to grapple with. A lot of advisors are making a good living, so it's interesting. I hear from a lot of advisors that they they would love to serve more clients in the way you're describing, maybe move down market and help, more people, because a lot of people who end up in the financial planning profession, as opposed to just, stock picking or asset management, they do feel a connection. They want to help people. They feel like it's an important thing that they're doing, but the business side of things makes it, challenging to really execute on that when it comes to serving, lower income and even middle income people sometimes. So it's a challenge for sure.
Knowing what you know now in terms of the software landscape and the like, let's just say you're not a reporter, a journalist, and you're tabula rasa. You can do whatever you want, and you have the entrepreneurial bug hit you, and you're seeing the landscape right now, and you're thinking, I'm going to make my move in the financial software space. Yeah. Where do you see a gap?
I would say, so like, I think that if I'm just thinking about with an entrepreneurial hat on, the biggest opportunity set out there is helping people with Social Security, because it touches every American, from the most wealthy to, the folks who need to rely on disability insurance or, just benefits coming from the federal government. It's a huge opportunity set. I have a lot of respect for firms that are out there. Like I just spoke recently with Joe Alsasser at Covisum. Mm-hmm. I think what he's doing is really interesting. The super powerful but relatively simple plans that he's developing for people, which is really cool. I had the opportunity just yesterday to meet with Martha Shedden, who's the head of the National Association for Registered Social Security Analysts, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's a great organization. I think some of the tools that they're trying to roll out for the public and for advisors are impressive and important. So I think helping people to make better Social Security claiming decisions is a huge opportunity, but a challenge as well, because the complexity of that system, all the different options that people have, it's a huge topic to tackle. So
that's an area too where, with having to go in person, this is all still playing out, but yep. An advisor being able to help the person may become more difficult, because it requires actually making appointments and showing up in person for things too. But yeah, absolutely. That is an important issue. And I talk to people too. There's the opensocialsecurity.com. If you want an open access free, Mike Piper developed that. It allows you to see your Social Security claiming decision. Most of the software right now does that in isolation, and so to be holistic, you have to look at how your claiming decision interacts with everything else. But for the most part, looking at other factors like tax efficiency and so forth just would help enhance the decision that software is providing.
Yeah. And I also think, Alex, just thinking even a little bit more outside the box, I talked earlier about the lifestyle challenge in retirement. I think there's an opportunity to help people, prepare better for retirement from a lifestyle perspective. Mm-hmm. So, maybe some sort of a solution or a quiz or an interactive guide that would help people sort of game out their retirement, help them get in touch with their interests, and will help them actually visualize what life after work will look like. And I think it sounds sort of fluffy and like maybe less important than things like a Social Security optimizer or an income planner, but I could see some sort of a solution there where you're going into the workplace and doing sort of workshops or whatever it is to help people really understand what it's going to be like to stop going to work every day.
No, that's to me, that's very ambitious, and I don't know how that's resolved. You were talking about earlier about the behavioral part of it and the like, and look, there's some like Daniel Crosby over at Orion's trying to do some very interesting things with that. I think it's tough. It's very noble, but I don't. And me coming at it with my psychologist hat on, I don't know if I can pull something like that off, because to me, behavior change is one of the toughest things around. Not everyone knows how to lose weight, right?
For sure.
Calories in, calories out, that kind of thing. It's not science, in rocket science at least,
Yeah.
and everyone struggles with it. And my thinking is, if you're not ever present with the person, dinging them or whatnot, I don't know how behavior will change having 2 meetings with an advisor a year max.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's that powerful enough that they can put their hand on your forehead and say, bad behavior, release John, kind of thing. It just doesn't work like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know where that's going. It's another buzzy thing that's been around, and buzzy with good reason. I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, like, it's gotten a lot of attention,
Yep.
but I don't know what to do with that. And from a pure intervention standpoint, now there's other stuff that's trying to get the advisor to be just a better friend to the person, which is effective because the better rapport you build, the more they listen in a sincere way, the better outcomes stands to reason, the better outcomes you have. But
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything that's like, oh wow, let me keep track of this. Have you?
Yeah.
Well, there is outside of financial planning, because that's the issue. Financial planning traditionally is more on the quantitative side, but like our friend Kevin Lyles with Retirement Researcher, his part of that retirement coaches organization, it's not about the financial planning. It's about, what do you do?
Preparedness. Yeah. I took
How
that
do you
class.
replace those 12 hours a day working and work related to not necessarily 12 hours, but anyway, how do you fill that time in a meaningful manner with having passion and purpose? Yeah, that's more of, it's not a financial planning question, but it's so hugely important.
Yeah.
How can financial planners help facilitate giving help to individuals? And maybe it is a completely separate group who's providing that type of service.
Do you see
Yeah.
anything, John, around that?
Not really. I mean, I think it's people who are sort of peripheral to the financial planning industry are involved in that. The closest thing that I see to that is when I talk to firms that are providing, catering services to the super wealthy, and the things that they're doing for their clients, like outside of just traditional financial planning, are pretty eye opening. I mean, everything from,
Dog
helping.
waters.
Yeah, literally, it's just like everything that can go into the a person's lifestyle when they're ultra affluent, from personal security while traveling, helping people curate private aviation, helping their children decide what colleges to apply to. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that is not about the wealth management portfolio, and apparently that's working for them. It creates a sense of loyalty and deep connection with those clients. That's obviously a far cry from what can happen in the mass affluent space. Firms aren't going to invest all those resources to support a person
No.
with $500,000 in their 401k. That's obviously not realistic.
No, and also when you get to
perhaps-
that, when you get to like the bill paying and things like that, then custody comes into play,
Sure.
and that becomes kryptonite for an advisor. Kind of don't want to even deal with
Yeah.
that hassle, frankly. But
Yeah.
that's not the norm. But something that was interesting that you said, I'm going to get your thoughts on, which is the next best action. There's a lot of softwares that are like, okay, we're not going to be this one ring to rule them all kind of software, but we're going to focus on this specific issue, et cetera, this specific niche issue. There's that piece. So there's those kinds of software that are very interesting. And you just said it. Look, I'm sure there's a holistic financial, use the word, there's a big cash flow, very detailed financial planning software that can deal with Social Security, right? But to me, they're not going to be as nuanced as like a specific Social Security timing software. Right. And so the advisor begins to cobble together all of these softwares, which you kind of need to get that specific expertise in that avenue of questioning. There's that. And then there's the reconciling that with the next best action. And that's a phrase for consumers where, okay, you don't want to boil the ocean. You want in giving advice. And so you have this client, they present XYZ. What should they be doing next?
Yep.
In the realm of successive approximations. What's the next thing to do? What's the next thing to do? That requires either a software that can boil the ocean,
Yep.
or extremes amounts of integration with all these different softwares.
Yep.
And that's a weird thing because to me, and this goes back to, let's say 20 years ago, there was this idea of your silver bullet, this consortium of all these softwares that can talk to each other and they'll agree to play nice. But I think what happens as these softwares began to grow within our space, and by grow, I mean now they became $20 million properties, $50 million properties, $100 million properties.
Yep.
The owners were like, oh my God, I'm out. And they sell it. They sell it to private equity or they sell it to the Orions of the world.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it went from let's integrate with everyone to, you know what, I'm going to have that one ring to rule them all.
Yep.
And I think we've been in that cycle for the last 5 years. And a lot of that had to do with just ownership transitioning because the ones that started it are aging out, or private equity gets in and, hey, we got to buy revenues. So let's buy this CRM company. Let's buy this whatever company. Let's buy this and cobble that all together into one sort of offering.
Yep.
I think you're starting to see that kind of cycle. I don't know. I don't see around corners or anything, but that's becoming stale, I believe, because of the advent of these niche softwares that are now coming back into play where advisors are like, yes, Orion offers this XYZ, but you know what? This other one does it a little bit better, and I'd rather have that.
Yeah.
I
think you're
how do you
spot on,
play
Alex.
that? How do you play that tension between next best movement that requires this sort of all-in-one or extreme amount of integration?
Yeah. I think the way that you describe the history of this space is spot on. It's something that we've seen, in tracking, whether it's the Orions of the world, the InvestNets,
Exactly.
that's what they're grappling with for sure, with differing levels of success, I would say. I think the next 2 years are going to be very telling on that front, Alex, because I think the tension that you're describing is definitely there, because at the end of the day, not to pick on Orion, but they can, build the best platform they can possibly build. What it comes down to is what tools advisors want to use and how they want to actually solve problems for their clients. And I think there is a real tension there. I think that my personal take, and I'm not working in the trenches, so I'm sure advisor listeners will all have their own take on this, and they may disagree with me, but I think that, some of these firms are reaching a point where they have made some big influential acquisitions. They've gotten their funding settled. They've either recapitalized or they have private equity ownership that has experience in the financial services space and has a 5 or 10 year perspective on getting a return and sort of getting their own benefit out of investing in this space. And I think right now they're sort of at a moment where they have an opportunity to create, truly powerful, interconnected advisory tool ecosystems that will allow advisors to deliver on the vision that we've sort of been talking around. I do think that's possible and may be right around the corner. I could be wrong. I don't have a crystal ball. We could see some of these firms not achieve the goals. But, for example, I have the opportunity to speak with the leadership at Orion pretty frequently. And what we're talking about right now is 100% what they're focused on. Whether they can achieve it is something that remains to be seen, but they're very well aware of the history we just described. They're living it, and they're very focused on trying to solve, this problem of allowing advisors to utilize their platform to truly do it all. We'll see. I think that the story of private equity's entrance into the wealth management and retirement and financial planning industry has been really important. I think in the coming years, we're going to continue to see more investment, and I think that trend is here to stay. We'll see what effect it ultimately has.
And how does this translate to consumers? Do you ever see a world where some of these softwares, and we say because it doesn't scale going down to consumers, but then all of a sudden you have AI, and I'm going to take a page out of Klarna, although they backtracked a little bit. All of a sudden, they can have a staff of quote unquote 1,000 AI agents handling customer requests, kind of thing. Just for giggles here, right?
Yeah.
And so, do you see a world where consumers will have access to the stuff that advisors have access to for bettering advice? And if so, would that present a point of contention with advisors from the standpoint of, are these softwares effectively becoming robo advisors because they're offering their software to consumers and to advisors? And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing at all, but I'm sure there's some advisors that are like hoarders, and they love the information asymmetry that they can, that increases their value.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. I think that's a big open question. We sort of lived that history once